I'm John.
Wait just a second.
Sorry. I'm John.
And I'm Keith.
And this is
Flumadiddle,
your somewhat reliable source of information for most things, including but not limited to
the history of rockets, the history of space travel,
Yes.
and the future of space travel, John.
Ooh, that is a comprehensive picture we're about to paint, Keith. And we've already got a couple of podcasts out. We're working on the third one.
Yeah, we
which is
decided
the
just to
future.
do one video on all three of the space stuff, right? So that's what this is. So let's start with the history of the rocket, John.
Let's just wait, Keith.
Okay.
I mean, I'm shocked that you haven't mentioned my
yeah.
swanky Italian
Hugh
by
Hefner.
way of Asian robe. At some point, I'm going to have to twist
cigar
around.
jacket.
Yeah, I don't smoke.
I just
but I do have
surprised
this-
John with a video. Hey, let's do a video, and he just rolled out of bed and said, "Hey,
Yeah,
let's do
man.
one."
I love it. Don't mind me.
This
Keith-
is how we roll, man.
Keith did make me put my shirt and underwear back on, though, before we did the video. He said that was not family friendly.
That is not. No,
So-
it wasn't a pretty sighting. I'm just kidding. But anyway.
All right.
History
Speaking
of the
of
rockets.
rockets,
Speaking
Keith.
of rockets and wooden pigeons, that is where the humble rocket started, right?
I see it. There was a guy named Archippus,
Archytas.
and he had something, Keith. What did he have?
He had a wooden pigeon, John.
Ooh,
he
man,
did, and he
can you
carried.
imagine?
He took his wooden pigeon around, and he just impressed folks with it.
Was he Greek or Chinese or what?
It sounds Greek. I'm pretty
It
sure
sounds
it's Greek.
Greek.
I think it's Greek.
We'll
yeah.
get to China in a
Archytas,
minute.
yeah.
Whoever the Chinese guy we talked
No,
about
he
probably
was
had a
Greek.
robe like this.
Probably so. Yeah.
I see the
robe.
dragon on the back, man.
Yeah. Maybe you have to show him the dragon on the back before we get down.
flash him before we go.
So anyway, this Archytas, he carried around this wooden pigeon, and he would amaze folks by making it fly. How do you make a wooden pigeon fly, John?
Well, I'm guessing since we're talking about rockets, maybe we're shooting at some kind of gunpowder type situation, some kind of solid propellant. of
Absolutely.
sorts.
So he just used a propellant that he put in there and would make it, and I'm not sure that he used gunpowder, but he used something to
He used
make
something.
it propel the gases, and they would just make it fly around. He used the principle of propulsion, John.
Propulsion.
Action versus reaction, right?
There you go.
For every action, there is an opposite and
If
an
this
equal
goes-
reaction, John. There you go.
Took me a second, Keith.
Yeah,
I picked it up.
That's okay.
I picked it up.
Yeah, you just rolled out of bed. So, all right. So anyway, then for a while after that, how did they use rockets? Probably how I would use rockets.
Well, the Chinese had, I'm thinking, as I recall, it's been a while, but arrows and fireworks.
That sounds like a fun day, don't it?
Yeah.
Arrows and fireworks. Yeah. So the Chinese they put the basically gunpowder on arrows, and
Right.
they tried to use them for battle, but they wasn't very accurate. But you got to imagine though that probably was a little scary, even if if you just hit one every once in a while, you're like, man, they got these projectiles,
These
coming
fiery
at us.
projectiles coming at us. That was something.
But
wasn't it?
because they wasn't very accurate, it wasn't actually useful for battle,
Correct.
for real battle.
Sure.
So they used them mostly for fireworks for the next several centuries, right?
Sure.
Then at the turn, and not a lot happened after that, right? You had the Renaissance, but you had the Middle Ages, and you had the Black Plague. They had other things to worry about, right? So,
Yeah, but the Chinese, that was kind of the big ancient proponents of this idea of propulsion,
Yeah.
fireworks, rocketry, arrows, that kind of thing. But then, Keith, we're going to skip forward a few decades, or a few centuries,
few
rather.
centuries, yeah. So the turn of the 19th to 20th century there.
Yes, now we're getting on up. We're
modern,
into the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Things are happening at a rapid pace.
Yes.
And so what happens then, Keith?
Well, that's really when modern rocketry started, right?
Okay,
And so this one cat came up with liquid fuel.
That was huge.
Liquid
the idea of
propellant
liquid propellant
instead of
as
solid.
opposed to solid
Yes.
propellant, which is like your gunpowder type stuff.
And then they increased in size. The distance was further. The efficiency was further. The accuracy was better. You had a couple cats there who was involved in all this. You can look these guys up. It was Robert Goddard. And
Goddard, there's a Goddard Space Flight Center, I think.
Yeah.
Some of the NASA stuff.
Yeah, he was very important in the invention or development of rockets.
Sure.
Right?
He
The
had a lot to
ideas
do, I
behind
think,
it.
with the liquid propellant
Yes.
stuff, didn't he?
And then you had Herman Oberth.
Herman Oberth.
Herman. I like to call him Herman.
Hey, while we're saying this, once you see this video, go back and listen to the first two podcasts, And the third one will probably be out about the same time as the video. So.
Yes, and you get a lot more information. This is the condensed version, you know, if you like watching videos and getting a little information. But if you want a lot of information.
If you want a lot of information, you listen to that second one.
Watch the podcast.
I'm learning to self-edit, y'all. Hey, but it's good information.
It is. It is. So anyway, the technology continued to develop, and in World War II now, rockets were not very, what would you say, John? Not very useful.
Not
in
very
World War
prominent
II.
at first, but
Right.
Keith, you got to imagine around that time you had the German Rocketry Society.
Yes.
And wasn't there a Soviet
Yes.
rocketry thing going on too? So the birth of this, the genesis of our modern day
Right.
rockets and space program was really happening in like the 20s, 30s, and then the 40s.
Yes, and so the Germans were really probably the best at it, and they come up with what was called as the A4 rocket, later known as the V2 rocket.
Yeah, there was a
Which-
V1 before that,
Yes,
obviously.
yeah, and I guess the A4 was the one that became the V2 there. Or maybe it became the V1 and then the V2. I don't know. Anyway.
Again, where you're somewhat reliable source of information.
But anyway.
I love that, Keith. I'm so glad we did that. That way we're just not on the hook for people
That's
like,
why we
y'all
did it.
didn't get this right. Y'all didn't
I
do
know.
this. Well, you know what? We encourage you to seek this out for yourself, not just because John and Keith said it.
Right.
Because we're overnight experts.
We do try to be as reliably accurate as we can be in
Absolutely.
the amount of time that we put into studying this stuff.
And
But
we were probably more accurate
have
on the
day jobs, right,
actual
so-
podcast
Yeah.
because this is a few weeks later after the first two podcasts.
yeah, so we may have forgot some stuff.
Exactly.
But anyway, it didn't change the course of the war,
Right.
obviously, or we'd all be speaking German now.
Right.
But it did, or it was used as a revenge weapon. They
Yeah.
hurled them over at London toward the end of the war, and it caused a lot of damage. And what was his face? Von Braun.
Werner von
Werner
Braun.
von Braun. He was quoted as saying, "Hey, these things work great," and that's actually not quoted, but paraphrased. These things work great, but they landed on the wrong planet. Right.
Exactly.
There is a quote, but I paraphrase.
Exactly.
It's
Which
a-
gives you a little bit of insight into him.
Yeah.
In some ways, you'll learn more about him later, but in some ways, he was very
Nazi.
much an opportunist
Yeah.
and a Nazi, but he was also somewhat conflicted
Yes.
about the things, and especially as he
It's easy
grew
for us
older.
to judge, for sure.
As
but
he
you
grew
don't-
older,
you don't
some
know.
people say
Yeah.
that he more embraced a certain faith,
Right.
and maybe he had some regrets.
I'm sure he did. Yeah.
I hope in
would
a
think
healthy
so,
way
yeah.
that maybe that was the case.
Right. So anyway, that led into the Cold War, right? So now you're starting to get the history of space travel because rockets become
Right.
a tool for space travel. Now, I mean, just think about this, guys. Everybody knows that the Cold War was all about like nuclear powers, right, and different ideologies. You had
Exactly.
two different nuclear powers that have very different ideologies.
Very
well,
much.
now you also have a thing that can transport the nuclear power, the nuclear weapon.
Yes, that
right?
was the big thing. So
So-
that's where it started out, right? Before what we call the modern space race, the idea of an intercontinental ballistic missile.
Yes.
And so you've got the guy in Russia, which you'll learn, or actually, I'm sorry, the Soviet Socialist Republic at
There
the
you go.
time, had a guy who came to be quite famous years later named Korolev, and he was kind of the flip side of the coin to the Germany's and then later the U.S.'s Werner von Braun.
Right.
And so they were both working for their different departments of defense creating these missiles. And these missiles are ultimately what became the rockets
Yeah.
that would propel the space race forward, putting like your Sputnik
Right.
and your satellites in orbit and ultimately manned flights into space.
Absolutely.
Dogged and monkeyed flights
And-
into space.
And so you had a couple other figures there, John, that you probably know a little bit more about, Kennedy and Johnson, right?
Yeah, I really didn't realize what a huge part that Lyndon Baines Johnson,
Yeah.
LBJ, played.
He kind
in
of
this whole
talked Kennedy
space thing.
into it.
He
pretty
really
much.
did.
He was really
used
the one
whole
who wanted
Sputnik
it. Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was a consummate politician. Whatever side of the fence
Oh,
you
yeah.
lean to, he's an interesting dude. With
And
was a
Kennedy
constant
always had
politician.
reservations about, going to the moon. But Lyndon Johnson, he never really had a reservation about it. That was what he wanted to do, right? He wanted to push them into that. And so when he become president, obviously it's going to happen at that point. And, maybe Kennedy, it would have happened with him too. We don't know.
well, it might have or might not,
Right.
but definitely LBJ definitely
Yes,
used
definitely.
that the whole our fallen president is dead thing.
Yeah,
To push the
he
whole
did.
space race forward.
He was a pretty brilliant politician.
He was,
He's like,
man.
are you gonna go against our great Kennedy's wishes?
Our fallen, slain leader.
Yes. So anyway, out of that you have the Mercury and then the Gemini missions and the Apollo missions.
Well, we
Or
prefer
if
to
you
call
wanna-
it that.
If you want to be sharp, you can say
Gemini.
Jiminy Cricket.
I'm not calling it Gemini. We're
like
here from the
Gemini.
South. I prefer Gemini.
But anyway, and then all the way to the Apollo missions, which we know is the missions that sent the man to the moon.
Ultimately, and we talked about that, the Saturn V rocket.
360
is that big
foot
rocket.
tall.
Yes,
Woo,
man. That's
7
so beautiful.
million pounds of
7
thrust.
million. And Keith
Million.
and I have both seen that rocket at the Huntsville
Yes, Huntsville Space and Rocket Center.
Space and Rocket Center.
It's sitting in ain't it in the Von Braun Center?
No,
Is that what it's called?
no.
The Davidson Center or something like
I
that?
don't know. There's a
right.
Von Braun Civic Center that's named after him, but that's
Yes.
where concerts happen.
So anyway,
But this is on the property of the Space
Flight
Flight Center.
Sitting inside, like laying flat
It's
in the ceiling. You
horizontal.
walk underneath it, right?
You walk the length of this place. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
And it's mind blowing. You just can't
Phenomenal.
imagine. That's a word for the day, Keith.
Phenomenal.
You,
You are phenomenal.
listener, are phenomenal.
Absolutely.
You're
So,
good enough. You're smart enough, and
Doggone it,
Keith
people
and John
and us like you.
like you.
Because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
All right.
And then you have the post-Cold War, which was a lot of the space shuttle program, which took most of the components of the ISS into space. And then you have the ISS, which is a big
International
deal.
Space Station.
A lot of things were done with the space shuttle program. I mean, listen to the podcast, you'll get a lot more information about that. But they accomplished a lot of things throughout there. A lot of people think we
that's
didn't.
not our main focus. The space
Right,
shuttle, though,
yeah.
that was a wonderful program that could have a whole
Yes.
separate podcast
Absolutely.
of its own.
But I
Sure.
mention it because a lot of people think, well, we didn't do nothing after going to the moon for 50 years. Well, that's not necessarily true. We did a lot of
we
things.
did a lot
yeah.
of stuff. A lot of scientific knowledge and learning related
absolutely.
to the International
And there was
Space
no
Station.
real good reason to go back to the moon until there was a reason, right? I mean, like, we've been there, we've done that, we discovered everything, and then at some point it's just like, why take the risk until we need to? And
Right.
now we've getting to the point now where we need to because we're looking toward
Mars.
Mars. There you go,
The
John.
red planet, Keith.
We have maybe not necessarily the abilities, but we have the idea that we might have the abilities
Exactly.
to go to Mars.
So
and
that brings us to, if you saw our podcast and video with
Dr. John Blevins.
Dr. John Blevins.
He is the chief engineer
of the
the SLS rocket,
right.
the Space Launch System rocket, which is sending men and the first woman, well, men back to the moon and the first woman to the
And
moon.
that is the Artemis missions. And Artemis is who?
In Greek mythology,
sister.
John, I learned this from you, is the sister of Apollo.
Apollo. I
Absolutely.
thought that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
The SLS, the largest, biggest, most powerful rocket in the history of mankind.
Yes, and we're set to put men back on the moon and the first woman in 2024.
2024.
And so we'll see if that still
Yeah, there
happens.
may still be some
but
COVID.
I hope so.
I'd like to see it.
But Dr. Blevins, he said, though, that COVID has really not slowed them down.
Well,
so
he
that's
did.
promising,
He said the way they're able to work remotely
Yeah.
and safely with what they have going on has not slowed them down a whole lot.
And so that leads us to the future of space travel, John, which was our third podcast. And I really like that one. I hope y'all check that one out. Because
Yeah, let's not give away too much. That's the creme de la creme. That's where
Yeah.
we take it and top it off. That's the cherry on top of the whole series.
I'll probably put this video out, though, after, so we can give away a little bit.
Okay, a little bit.
But you know, we talked about different private companies and NASA.
We talk about the space phallus that Keith has on his T-shirt.
Oh yeah,
here.
right here. Yeah, it's
Blue Origin.
the Blue Origin, the space fallacy, known as the Blue Origin. But yeah, Jeff Bezos just flew into space right after Richard Branson. A couple billionaires, a couple weeks in a row there flew into
Exactly.
space. We talked about Elon Musk and his visions for going to Mars. Elon Musk says that we are better as an interplanetary species than not. And John says that sounds like wah, 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 wah.
Exactly.
like a robot
Wah,
or
wah.
something.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Wah, 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 wah,
And
wah,
I
wah.
agree. I think that's a stupid answer for going to Mars. And Jeff Bezos is kind of on the flip side of that coin. He's saying that no, Earth is our best planet. It's going to be our planet
This
for
beautiful blue
the
planet.
foreseen future of mankind. So the idea of him going out into space and onto Mars would be to actually take industry that is polluting our planet into space so that it keeps this planet safe, and even population at some point. He talks about some far, far future things where you might be able to set up space colonies that orbit the Earth, right, and have some of the population in. And we're talking about like, things with artificial gravity, and this is very sci-fi, but things with artificial gravity that's just as good as being here on Earth, in order to get some of the population off Earth so that you can preserve our most precious thing given it to us by God Almighty.
I see some dark...
Earth, right?
Yeah, Keith. I see some dark dystopian stories based on who gets sent into those kind of colonies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You said Alabama fans in the podcast, right?
Yeah, I may have.
So, yeah, that's right.
We're
going to leave the Auburn fans down here to do all the work.
Religion.
And we'll go on up there. Right?
It'd be based on race, religion, socioeconomic. It'd be bad, unless it's not.
But anyway, we did talk about like some of the things we don't believe will happen, like reaching the nearest star.
Oh, never.
I mean, like, just listen to the podcast to hear some of the math on that, how far away that actually is.
Just the magnitude of the distance.
Yes.
And the number of years that it would take.
Some of you are saying, well, anything's
lifetime.
possible. Well, at some point you're thinking, no, that reaches the realm of impossibility.
Yeah, maybe on this earth anything's possible. But,
Right. Well, with God, anything's possible.
Exactly.
And when we die, maybe we will be jumping from planet to planet,
knows,
from star to star, John. I don't know. But as human beings, in this flesh,
in a body that lives a max of 115, 20 years.
Now, we
if
did.
you're some old dude from China wearing a beautiful jacket like this.
We did have a little disclaimer, though. We said, unless we find out some kind of physics that we don't know about. Right?
Yeah, like some wormhole type stuff.
Yeah, like bending space-time. That's the only way, though. That's really the only way. So that's about it, man.
That's about it. I think this is great. I think y'all are great.
Absolutely.
And, hey, Keith, it's been a long time since I've mentioned Ireland. So I think Ireland's great.
You're wearing green.
And I'm wearing green.
There you go. It's a Chinese-Irish
I'm an Irish Asian.
cigar.
I'm an Irish Asian.
Jacket. There you go.
All right, we love y'all.
Yeah.
Grace and peace.
Hey, consider donating on Patreon. We would really appreciate that.
DoYouFlummadiddle@gmail.com. DoYouFlummadiddle.com. What is it? Patreon/DoYouFlummadiddle? Or
no, just Flummadiddle.
Just Flummadiddle.
Yeah.
FLUMADIDDLE. One M, not two, because two
is a dessert, John.
A dessert that we still haven't made, Keith.
We're going to make
one of these days.
Yes.
Love y'all.
God bless.